Welcome to I-24 News Defense Magazine. I'm Alon Ben David with your weekly review of security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. In this edition, we'll hear the latest assessment about the emerging agreement between the six world powers and Iran, discover a new laser system promising to protect from mortars and short-range rockets, and discuss the recent lifting of American arms embargo on Egypt and Russia's re-emergence as a major arms supplier in the region. Let's begin. The recent understandings that came out of Switzerland between the six world powers and Iran had many world leaders on their feet, and here in Israel, the Prime Minister has made his opposition to any Iran deal his top priority. What does such a deal truly mean for the Middle East, and what are the gaps between Washington, Tehran, and Jerusalem? Joining me now from the Institute for National Security Studies is the head of the Institute, General Amos Yadlin, former head of Israel's military intelligence. Mr. Yadlin, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Alon.
We've heard so many observations on the agreement with Iran. On the scale between reasonable and terrible, how would you rate it?
First of all, there is no agreement. There is declaration on parameters that were published only by one side, the Americans. If the parameters will be the agreement, it is not a terrible agreement. It is not a historical achievement. It's an agreement that should be improved to make sure that it achieved the policy of the president, that Iran way to the nuclear bomb is blocked on the uranium track, on the plutonium track, and on the covert activities.
But even President Obama himself admitted that Iran could develop military nuclear capabilities when the agreement is over. Is it just what they call in American kicking the can down the road?
We have to clarify that nor President Obama and nor anybody in the P5+1 is allowing Iran to develop nuclear weapon even after 10 years, 15 years, or 25 years. What the president have said, and rightly so, that if the Iranians will use what they are allowed to use at the end of the 10 or 15 years, they can be in a zero distance from a bomb upon decision. But the decision is not allowed to the Iranians.
There are significant gaps between the American description of the deal and the Iranian one on the timing of the relief of sanctions, on Iran's ability to develop new centrifuges. Apart from understandable marketing attempts on each side, can you tell whose description is more accurate?
I cannot tell because I wasn't in the negotiation table and I don't know what was agreed. But I think the area of disagreement are exactly the gray areas that should be clarified before they are signing the agreement on the 30th of June. And this is the R&D issue. Iran should not be allowed to prepare a very advanced centrifuges for the day after the limitations on her nuclear program will end. It's the PMD, the possible military dimension of the program, that should be revealed, investigated, and the inspectors of IAEA should get an access to all the documents, the organization, the personalities, and the organizations that have done these activities. And the last issue that in this agreement is the issue of sanction relief timing. So all these issues should be clarified to make sure that the details of the agreement supporting the strategic goal.
But this emerging deal is already promising to bring back Iran to the family of nations. What implications will it have on Iran's regional position?
The Americans are distinguishing between two issues, the nuclear issue and the rest of the Iranians' bad behaviors. It's not necessarily a strategic mistake because the scope and the danger from the nuclear issue is much greater than any other activity. However, the Americans should insist, as they did in the agreement, that they will not lift the sanctions that related to the terror activities and supporting of of all the proxies of Iran in the area. And what I recommend to the Israeli government is to have a bilateral understanding and dialogue, and maybe even an agreement with the US. And one of the chapters in this bilateral agreement is to make clear that America will continue to work with its allies, not only Israel, the Saudis, the Egyptians, against all the negative activity of Iran in the area, disregarding to the existence of a nuclear agreement.
If an agreement is indeed struck in June along the parameters that we know now, where does it leave Israel? With a military option viable again?
Israel should have the military option all the time on the table. If the Iranians keep the agreement to the last letter and the last word, Israel should not use the military option, because Iran will roll back and will stay there. But if the Iranians will violate, will cheat, will go to the bomb, Israel, and I think the US as well, will have to consider all the options to stop the Iranians, including the military option.
During your time as the head of military intelligence, there were many sabotage operations against Iran attributed to Israel. Will an agreement allow Israel to renew its covert activity in Iran?
I think covert activity is covert activity. It is not covered in an agreement. If issues like this are discussed, it has to be discussed once again between the two countries in a very discreet and not on the open media.
General Yadlin, thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you, Alon.
The relative success of the Iron Dome anti-rocket system during latest summer's Gaza war uncovered a new weakness: short-range rockets that could reach the communities in close proximity to the Gaza Strip, where no warning and no protection was available to residents. But now, tests of a new mobile high-energy laser launched by the Boeing company proved to be successful, and they say it can save lives in the next round of conflict. Here's more. For 2 decades, scientists have been telling us that soon, real soon, there will be a laser weapon that would intercept rockets and mortar bombs. Now, claims the Boeing company, it's actually happening.
So LMD's primary mission is what they call CRAM, that's a counter rocket artillery mortar.
LMD will demonstrate taking a target cue from a radar to a munition that's already in the air, slewing to that target, tracking that target optically, and then actually killing it with the laser system.
Showing a level of finesse and precision that's really never been demonstrated before in any directed energy system.
A Boeing representative came to Israel in the last days to present the results of a series of tests in which Boeing mobile high-energy laser has successfully intercepted rockets and mortars.
It's a prototype. It's been demonstrated in the field. We would make some changes for a next generation system based on what we've learned with this one, but I would say it's an 80% solution right now.
The system's radar detects and tracks incoming mortar bombs. It directs a laser beam, which heats up the target until it ignites the explosives inside the bomb, causing it to burst in the air. Boeing's solid-state laser has so far demonstrated a 10 kilowatts capacity, which is low, but says that it could be expanded to higher output.
The moment that LMD gets a cue from the radar system that ammunition has been launched, it takes literally seconds for us to lock on to target.
We get a very precision track on that target at a very specific aim point, and that's the lethal aim.
It's a start, so we've demonstrated good effectiveness with that size of laser.
The need is crucial. Israel's Iron Dome proved to be highly effective in protecting most of the Israeli rear, but provided no protection to communities in proximity to the Gaza Strip. Those communities suffered a constant shower of short-range rockets and mortars, which were the cause to the majority of casualties in the Israeli rear in last summer's conflict. For those Israelis living under threat of mortars, would you say that there is an existing solution today?
Yes, yes.
Boeing claims it could deploy an operational system in Israel within 2 years. Israeli Ministry of Defense is skeptical, claiming that the technology is not yet mature. Meanwhile, Israel is left with no effective defense against short-range rockets and mortars. As the turmoil unfolds in Yemen, all eyes are on regional stability and the US-backed allies in the Middle East. So, with Washington announcing it will be lifting its 18-month embargo on military aid to Egypt, many wonder how will it further impact the already fragile situation. Lauren Izo has more.
The battle in Yemen has enveloped the conflict in the Middle East. While Saudi Arabia is the front-runner in the initiative to oust Houthi rebels in the country, Operation Decisive Storm, Egypt has also announced its allegiance to the Saudi-led coalition aiming to restabilize Yemen. Egypt has deployed warplanes to aid in strikes and has said that they will potentially contribute ground troops.
The security, the defense, and the securing of Bab al-Mandab is a matter of Egyptian and Arab national security. Who is going to fight for it? We are, along with our brothers.
The United States, with no direct reference to this growing conflict, announced that they plan to sell 356 Hellfire 2 missiles to Egypt in a deal that may cost up to $57 million. Other countries taking part in the coalition include Morocco, Jordan, Sudan, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain. Reports of the deal with Egypt shortly followed Washington's pledge to lifting its hold on the supply of military equipment to Cairo, an embargo which has been in place since the military took power in Cairo nearly 2 years ago. Egypt has been the second largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid since its peace treaty with Israel in 1979. However, aid was frozen after the Egyptian army overthrew former President Mohamed Morsi.
We are now joined in the studio by Yiftach Shapir, Senior Research Fellow at the INSS, where he heads the Middle East Military Balance Project. Thank you for joining us. With the Americans lifting the embargo on Egypt, what's in the Egyptian shopping list?
Well, first of all, there were the deals that on the table, the Apache AH-64D and the Hellfire. And, well, F-16s, they have already quite a large number, and on the table was another deal for another 20-something F-16s. And of course, today, or this week, we were told that they are acquiring more Hellfire missiles for the Apache. And this is the immediate shopping list. There are the M1A1 Abrams tanks. Again, Egypt has over 1,000 of these.
But now that Egypt is playing as a regional player, putting a naval siege on Yemen, what are the Egyptian needs?
Well, the trouble is not the Egyptian needs, but the problem is the Egyptians' capability to pay for them. And this capability is limited. I mean, like every modern army, they would have, if not to expand, to renew. I mean, getting old planes out of service and replacing them with new ones. I don't see, for example, Egypt ordering right now the F-35. It's way beyond Egypt's capability, although I'm sure they want it, because for many, many years, one procurement strategy for Egypt was like Israel. If Israel wants it, we want it too.
But when the Americans backed off, the Egyptians kept their options open and made a deal with France.
They kept their options open all along. I mean, for example, their air defense remained for many, many years Soviet-made, Russian-made. In the past decade, they upgraded what we used to call SA-3. We now call it by the Russian name Pechora, and it's upgraded. It looks the same, but it's very much far more advanced system than we had during the Soviet era. And they want, and they are talking about acquiring the S-300s.
There were reports that they already got it.
There were reports that they've already got it, but I don't buy it. I mean, these deals take a long time. We are talking about the S300V, which is entirely different.
The export version.
No, it's not the export version. It is an export version, but it is a completely different system than the S300 PMU, which Iran wanted, which Syria wanted, which was sold all over the world. Completely different, although the name is the same, because it was developed by a different company, even back then during the Soviet era.
Thank you very much, Yiftach Shafir. That's all we have time for today. Thank
sorry.
you for joining us. Join us again next week for another Defense Magazine. Have a safe night from Jaffa Port.